Welcome. This is the video of the ranking of the Beatles and their studio albums from 1964 all the way up to 1970 when they stopped. My history with the Beatles is pretty interesting. In somewhere around 2002 or 2003, I took a class in college called The History of Rock and Roll, and I needed that class to fulfill a general requirement. And I didn't know what I was taking. It was instructed by one of the music department professors, and he was really cool. He was really into guitar, and he was really animated about the course, and he just kind of stand up in front of everyone as we were seated in regular chairs, not even in desks, and we'd take notes. And back then I was really into Yes and Pink Floyd and Metallica and Danzig and Rush. So the Beatles to me was largely, I didn't know anything. It was unexplored, and you'd think with the history of rock and roll, well, the professor's idea was you could teach the history of rock and roll just through the Beatles, with a few exceptions. He included the Rolling Stones here and there, and he brought up Jimi Hendrix and some other acts that were important. But because the Beatles had done all these covers in the early '60s, covering their favorite acts of the '50s and then the early '60s, and then through their own original material, you can largely teach the history of rock and roll just through that. And so that's what the course was. And I'm really grateful and lucky to have been able to take it. And so I'm happy to share all that with you. Now, for me, in 2002, I was all bright and chipper and wet around the ears. I didn't have any of these albums. I started buying some of the albums that I liked. But what's different for America versus the rest of the world is the uh, the American contract through EMI was with Capitol Records. So Capitol Records being a subsidiary of EMI, and in the UK, EMI owned Parlophone, and that's how they were releasing them over there. And there's a difference between the markets. So while um, really really odd differences too. So like while the Beatles' first two British albums had 14 tracks, in America, if you bought an LP, it was more typical to have 12 tracks. And in America, it was more common for an album to have the most popular singles, like whatever was being played on the radio. And that's not the way the UK market was. The UK market, you had an album and then you had singles, and the singles were not on the album, and you would release the singles and sell them as singles with an A and a B side, and that's just different. So there's a lot of confusion when the CDs came out in the late '80s. So like right around '87, '88, CDs were being published. The Beatles' whole catalog was released on CD, the UK version. And that was the first time they were able to control their own content. In America, these albums came out differently. And luckily enough, right when I'm becoming a Beatles fan and I'm buying these things, uh, Apple Music and Capitol Records released these. You've got the Beatles Volume 1, which is the Capitol Records or the Capitol Albums Volume 1, and it contains 4 CDs from 1964. And that 2 years later, the Beatles, the Capitol Records Volume 2, which has 4 records that came out in 1965. So it's amazing. These are the way the albums came out in America and not in UK. And so if you were buying CDs in '88, you were buying the UK versions. If you were buying these on vinyl record in the 1960s, you were buying them the way they are here, and that's the way I have them, and that's the way I'm going to go through this. So there's difference, and there's a lot of complaining and griping. Generally, the American fans felt like they were getting screwed. The Beatles thought they were getting screwed, that they were being released this way, but that's just the way it is. Also, the Volume 2 came in a long box, and for some reason I still have these. But the long boxes are cool. And, I enjoy listening to these. What I've been trying to do lately is take all the tracks, and I've been building playlists to try to resemble the UK releases, but that's not quite working out because not all the songs are there. And also, there was one of the releases which is really controversial called Yesterday and Today, which would have been the fifth, but they didn't include it. Now, you can get Yesterday and Today as of 2014. It was released in a box set and as a single, but it didn't come with the volume 2. But it's controversial because it had the Beatles picture, and they're like holding baby doll heads, and it had slabs of meat, and they were holding knives and stuff. And of course, that elicited a huge reaction in America. They were already becoming unpopular for some of the decisions they were making. The other thing that's different about these Capitol albums is, and I won't give you the long explanation. I can include the link, and if you want to go read it, this guy's written a really good article, a great article about the explanation. But the long story short is, when George Martin, they would make an album. Back in the day, mono was very popular, so the mono mix was generally the better mix. And maybe later that day or the next day, they do a stereo mix, and those also got released. But when Capitol Records, they didn't always get the stereo releases. Okay, so this Capitol Records executive named Dexter, he did what he could to create a stereo mix that they called duophonics. And what duophonics is they would take one channel or one speaker, and they would turn the treble all the way up and the bass all the way down. Okay, and then in the other speaker, they would do the opposite. So they'd turn the treble all the way down and the bass all the way up. And then they would put a slight delay on there so it didn't sound perfect, and then add some, reverb or echo effects. And these are generally referred to as the Dexter stereo mixes, or the or the Dexter mixes, or duophonics. And that is prominent in the volume 1. Okay, the very earlier ones have that. And then lastly, also I'll note, I have a misprint of the volume 2. So when I get to that album, I'll talk about it. But what we'll do now is we'll go through each of these 14 records, and I have them ranked from best to worst and from worst to best, and we'll go through from worst to best. Okay? Before we get into number 14, the Beatles are John Lennon, who is the leader, and it's really his band all the way through until the end, where Paul's starting to take over. But he's the idealist of the bunch. He's the oldest, and he comes from a broken home, and that's sort of like a thing that comes out in all of his songs. Is it's very introspective. And he's one of the main songwriters for the Beatles. Paul McCartney is the other. He's the craftsman. He came up from a middle-class working family, and that's sort of like ominent in all of his tunes. He's the second writer of the group, and for the most part, the songs are credited Lennon-McCartney. And the general rule, which was iterated in the class that I took, and in other books, and in Wikipedia, and all over the place, whoever sang the song or was the lead vocalist wrote the song, and it's almost always that way. And there are some exceptions. There are songs where they co-wrote, but that's generally how it is. George Harrison is the lead guitarist, and he's the youngest member of the group. He can play anything, is what Paul McCartney said. He's fantastic, terrific. He got into his Indian stage where he was learning Indian music and learning how to play sitar and other instruments, and that starts to become prominent in Beatles songs. But also George, as the years went on, he became more of an important in songwriting and wrote some of the coolest Beatles songs, to be honest. Ringo is the drummer. He's the goofball. He's a underrated drummer. I think he's one of my favorite drummers. And he seems to have that jazz style where he's hitting the hi-hats and the cymbals a lot. George Martin is the producer. Sometimes he's referred to as the fifth Beatle. He's not really a Beatle, but he's an Englishman that speaks the Queen's English and is very formal. But he brought out and got the most out of the Beatles. And then lastly, Brian Epstein is the manager of the Beatles. And he had this vision. The group wanted to go to America and become big, and Brian Epstein is the one that helped him get there. And there's even a Beatles song about Brian Epstein, and it's a good song. And that's the Beatles. So, number 14 is my least favorite Beatles album, is Help from 1965. Now, this is the original motion picture soundtrack help. It's not the same as the help that you could buy in the UK or the rest of the world. The rest of the world, they had like, it was like a full album with a bunch of songs on it. This this version right here that you get in Volume 2 has 5 instrumentals that come from the movie and 7 Beatles tracks. Okay. Um, Now the first song, "Help," um, it's interesting because if you listen to the single or like the version that's on the Red album, um, this is the Red album, so it's like a greatest hits of the Beatles. If you listen to "Help," it just starts with "God, I need somebody." Okay, but on this, it's got this weird bullshit orchestral introduction to it, and that's that's the first funny thing. The rest of these songs are like, um, it's like the songs are interlaced with the BS instrumentals. Okay, "The Night Before," that's a real Beatles song that Paul's singing on. That's the second track. The third track, "From Me to You Fantasy," is it's like a bullshit instrumental where they're playing the song "From Me to You," but it's like all orchestra. "You've Got to Hide Your Love Away" is on there. That's a song about Brian Epstein, who's the Beatles manager, and that's really good. It's a really good John song. "I Need You" is a George acoustic and has some kind of cool synth keyboard in it. "In the Trials," another bullshit instrumental. "Another Girl Is Paul," and it's got this real country twang. I think that must be George doing that. "Another Hard Day's Night" is a another bullshit instrumental with some sitar on it. I would imagine that's sitar. And it's a Hard Day's Night, and then it's got some other kind of flute or some kind of wind instrument that's playing. "Ticket to Ride's on here. That's cool, and it's a John song, and John's super cool singing it. "The Bitter End," "You Can't Do That," is an instrumental. It just seems like these instrumentals really slow down the album, but that's the way they wanted it released in the US, is they wanted the music from the actual movie, much like a soundtrack. And then lastly, "You're Gonna Lose That Girl." That's John. This is a good song, and there's a real funny line in it. "I'm gonna treat her kind. I'll make a point of taking her away from you." So anyway, number 14, my least favorite Beatles album, "Help." Number 13, or my second least favorite Beatles album, is "Something New." Now, "Something New" is uh it's almost the equivalent of "A Hard Day's Night," which is a movie that the Beatles did, and there were songs in the movie. And in the UK release, it was called "A Hard Day's Night." And I think my mom actually has that album. I think I bought it for her actually. Um, but this is number 13, "Something New." Now, this is a boring album. Um, it's mainly a John album. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 John songs out of the 11 tracks. And one of the 11 tracks is "I Want to Hold Your Hand" in German. So it's kind of like just a throwaway almost. Um, I don't really have a lot to say about this album. Probably the best song on it is "Slow Down," which is a Larry Williams cover. And John is singing, and it's just awesome. it's, it's one of those cool songs. Ringo is singing on here. He's singing "Matchbox," which is a Carl Perkins song. And by the way, you're going to notice in a lot of the Beatles, they really liked country. I mean, a lot of these old rock bands do. Even Metallica likes country a little bit, and Jerry Cantrell and Alice in Chains. A lot of these rock and roll bands have a strong country influence, and you'll see it on a lot of these records. There's a lot of Carl Perkins covers, and a lot of them are sung by John, George, or Ringo. And this is the first one. So this is the first example, is "Matchbox." But there's a bunch of famous songs on here. John sings "Tell Me Why." Paul sings "And I Love Her." George sings "I'm Happy Just to Dance." And one of the real popular Beatles songs is "If I Fell," which John sings. That's about it. Yeah, for the most part, it's a boring album, except for yeah, "Slow Down." John's pretty awesome, so I'll just go with that. Number 13, "Something New." All right, number 12 on the list is the Beatles 6, which, if you're in the UK or you have the UK releases, it's essentially Beatles for Sale or parts of Beatles for Sale, but it's the boring parts of Beatles for Sale. And generally, this is another boring album, but not as boring as the Something New. Um, it has some bunch of famous songs though. Kansas City, Hey Hey Hey, which is a Lieber Stroller. 8 Days a Week is John. That's a popular one. I'm just looking at the track list. There's not too many highlights. I don't want you to spoil the party. John singing, and it's got this real country twang again. You'll notice. Words of Love, also John singing another country influenced song. Although it's a Buddy Holly song, you can really hear the country. Paul singing a few songs. What are you doing? Tell me what you see. John is belting out Dizzy Miss Lizzie, which is a Larry Williams track. By the way, John really liked this artist named Larry Williams, who was a black rock and roller from the American South in the 50s. John, you can tell John really loves him, and when he's singing a Larry Williams song, he's really excited about it. There's two of them on this one. There's Bad Boy and there's Dizzy Miss Lizzie. Okay, and I'm gonna say, oh, Every Little Step is on here too, which Yes covered, and I guess I like the Beatles version better, even though I'm gonna say Yes is still my favorite band. Maybe it could be King Crimson, but it's close. It's close. I do like the Beatles version better of Every Little Step. I'm gonna say the best track on this one is a tie between Kansas City and 8 Days a Week. Other than that, for the Beatles, this is pretty boring. The Beatles 6. Number 11, the Beatles' second album. it's it's a little outrageous that they called it the second album. If you know anything about the history of the Beatles, they had a release in America that flopped, and then and they released the single "She Loves You" in 1963, and it really didn't do anything. So, but this is called the Beatles' second album. Now this is with the Beatles leftovers. With the Beatles is the UK release. Plus, it has "Long Tall Sally" and some other songs. Okay, this is just another boring album, although they're starting to get less boring. This has "Roll Over Beethoven," which George is playing some rockin' guitar and singing. You Really Got a Hold on Me is, I guess you've probably heard it. "Devil in Her Heart" is just okay. "Money's" just okay. You Can't Do That. Long Tall Sally, I think that's Paul just cranking that out. So Paul really loved Little Richard. I mean, they all did. And just like I said when I was talking about you can explore the history of rock and roll just by listening to Beatles albums, well, this one has Little Richard on it, Long Tall Sally. And Paul can really sound like him, actually. He does a good job just wailing it out. I Call Your Name. Please, Mr. Postman is a boring... It's like a boring boy band song. I don't know why they chose that. I'll Get You, and then She Loves You is the last track. I'm going to say She Loves You is the best track on here, for sure. And this is one of them. When you put it in, you can really hear that duophonic. Now, remember I was talking about how they would turn the treble up and the bass down on one speaker and do the opposite on the other speaker and delay and echo. It's really obvious um, on this record. And I didn't mention it earlier, but all these albums, you can see when you look at it, they've got the stereo tracks first and then the mono tracks second. So all of these Capitol albums, they're all like that, and you can get a flavor of what those releases were like. Okay, um, yeah, the Beatles' second album. Just by the way, not a good album cover. Not great. And the second kind of mimics the second side of it. Kind of the same image. Okay. I don't have much to say about this one either. The Beatles' second album, I've got it number 11. Number 10, the Early Beatles. Now, this one came out in volume 2, so that means it came out in 65, which is interesting because a lot of these songs were called from the UK release Please Please Me. And Please Please Me was released in 63. So a lot of these songs, they're coming out 2 years after they were recorded in America. But uh, it's starting to become more interesting here and less boring. I'll say this is the first not boring album. And it's about 50-50. There's lots of cover songs. There's 6 cover songs and there's 5 Beatles originals. And I'm gonna say the best song on here is Twist and Shout, which is it's the second track. Now Twist and Shout, when it came out on Please Please Me, was the last song. And on this one it's the second track. The first track is Love Me Do, which is a Beatles single. And Please Please Me is on here too, and P.S. I Love You. Those are the B-sides and other singles. Those are all kind of interesting. Taste of Honey's on here, and Do You Want to Know a Secret? It's better. It's better than the previous ones for sure, especially the Beatles' second album. Um, but it's just I guess a better collection of songs. But what makes it stronger are the singles and Twisted Shout. Yeah. So the cover's kind of interesting. I wonder what year the picture was taken. So was this from 63 or was it 64 or 65? That's my burning question. Number 10, the Early Beatles. All right. Number 9 is the Revolver. From this point out, we're getting into really excellent albums, either good, great, or excellent. And I think it's fair to say that the Beatles have that many good albums. Now, the ones that came before it, were they great in 65 or 64? Probably. But when you listen to them nowadays, they're not excellent, and you can hear a lot of the tiredness and fatigue in the Beatles. They were run ragged all over America and Canada, and Revolver's interesting because they're getting into that we're gonna stop touring stage, and you can hear that here. So these are good songs. I think George Martin perhaps messed up the sequence of the songs because there's something not quite right about the order when you listen to it from beginning to end. I'm not sure what the answer. I'm not sure I could give you a better order, but I've on some CDs that I have where I figured out that if I listen to it in a different order, I really like it. Well, I haven't figured that one out for this one, but the first track is Taxman, which is a George song, and it's a fine song. I don't know if it should be the first song on the album. Eleanor Rigby's on here, which is essentially Paul McCartney solo with some strings or violins playing behind him, and he's telling a story about this person named Eleanor Rigby. There's some throwaway skip tracks. I'm Only Sleeping. Track 4 is Love You Too. That's a George song, and you can really hear the strong Indian influence on it. It's one of the first Beatles songs I read where he doesn't actually say "Love You Too" in the song. No, it's not sung in the song. Here, There, and Everywhere is on here. That's a good Paul McCartney tune, but it's just kind of like a soft, put you to sleep kind of song. Yellow Submarine is a John Lennon song that Ringo sings. She said. Okay, Good Day Sunshine is another one of these weaker Paul songs. It'll just put you to sleep. And Your Bird Can Sing, For No One. Dr. Robert is a John Lennon song. I Want to Tell You. That's a George song. Got to Get You Into My Life. That's okay. That's Paul McCartney. And Tomorrow Never Knows. Okay, so Tomorrow Never Knows is a great album ender. It's John Lennon, and it's really monotone, like in one. It's like in the key of C. It's just playing one chord over and over. It's got a lot of backwards guitars going on, and John does a great job of like singing a real futuresque, almost like James Bond type song. It's pretty cool. I think a lot of you would put Tomorrow Never Knows as your favorite track on this one. And maybe it is. Maybe it's the best track. I'm going to say my favorite is Dr. Robert. It's like just kind of this outrageous song where John Lennon's singing about, I would imagine, drugs. It's like, by this time, they're doing a lot of drugs, okay? They've been doing LSD and they've been smoking weed for a while, so it's definitely part of what they're doing. And he's singing about how Dr. Robert can fix you up, and he works for the National Health, and it's kind of funny. It's one of my favorite Beatles songs actually. Well, let's leave it at that. Number 9. By the way, Don't Kill Me. I know this might be your favorite Beatles album. It's not mine, but it's number 9, Revolver. It's a good album. Number 8 is Magical Mystery Tour. I might get some hate mail over that just because I've got it ahead of Revolver. It's a weird album. By the way, I just got this year, or last year. This is new for me, and it's a Capitol Records print, but it's not part of the Volume 1 or Volume 2 series. So okay, well that's that. It's for me. This is a newer. I just picked it up at the exclusive company before it closed. It's a bit of a compilation album with singles and some new material. But you should know all these songs. The Magical Mystery Tour is the title track, and it's the first track. Okay. And The Fool on the Hill comes from Sgt. Pepper, I think. Maybe. Flying's on here. Blue Jay Way is a really cool George Harrison song that I like. Like that one quite a bit. Your Mother Should Know You. Okay, that's a bit of a skip. I'm the Walrus is on here. That must have been a single that they pulled in. Hello, Goodbye, Strawberry Fields Forever, Penny Lane. Baby, You're a Rich Man. Baby, You're a Rich Man. All You Need Is Love is on here. And it says there's a mini documentary. Insert into computer to view. I've never done that. I mean, honestly, it's hard to get a good computer with a good CD drive right now. Yeah, so this is a better collection of songs, even though at the time they got panned for, for repeating some of their material. And this is after Brian Epstein died, so they were a little bit leaderless. There's a struggle between Paul and John as to who's driving the bus. There's some cool pictures in here too. Good artwork. Here's a good picture. And there's a nice modern booklet in here that I've looked at a couple of times. Yeah, this is it's just okay. You know, they really got killed, and was this maybe this was part of a movie or something? But it's let's put it number 8, Magical Mystery Tour. And they're really getting into the psychedelic. Um, I mean, they've already been there, but this one is like the psychedelia really ramped up. Okay, let's go to number 7, um, the White Album or the Beatles. It only says the Beatles on it, and it doesn't say, like, if you look here, it just says the Beatles, the Beatles. I guess it's titleless. Everyone calls it the White Album. I call it the White Album. You probably call it the White Album. But I think it's just called the Beatles. Yeah, this is another. When artists do double albums, I never quite know what to make of it because what does that mean? A lot of content, a lot of songs, tracks, lots of time on music. This one has a bunch of tracks on both discs, and it's uneven. Okay, now I've picked out which tracks are my favorite tracks on both discs, and maybe we'll talk about the skips a little bit, but I've got disc 1 has better tracks than disc 2. Okay, I like Dear Prudence, Glass Onion, Bungalow Bill. I like Bungalow Bill. The continuing story of Bungalow Bill. John Lennon's cool sometimes. While my guitar gently weeps is a George song. That's on disc 1. Happiness is a Warm Gun is one of the really just clever, funny John Lennon songs. Piggies, and Rocky Raccoon, and Why Don't We Do It in the Road. Disc 2, my favorite tracks are Birthday, Your Blues, Helter Skelter is awesome, Savoy Truffle. Honestly, the rest of it's shit. Revolution 9 is just supposed to be this avant-garde. Number 9, number 9, number 9. Oh, it's like noise and instruments, but it's not really doing anything. The version of called Revolution 1 is on here. Now, there's a different version of Revolution that you've probably heard before, which is on the Blue Album. And that's the single version. It's more up-tempo. The version that's on here is like a slower tempo. John preferred the slower tempo one. I don't prefer one over the other. It's just different. Revolution 9 I don't like at all. It's just stupid. Yeah, Birthday's on here, Yeah, okay. Why did they make this? They were in India and they were writing music, and they just wrote so many songs when they were in India. George wanted to go to India, John wanted to go. They were really excited about going to India. They talked Paul and Ringo to go over. They went over. They did all their mantras and they ate vegetarian food, and they followed the yogi guy. And they wrote a bunch of songs, and they wanted to get all these songs on the album, so that's what they did. They were trying to be more of a rock band again. They were getting away from the psychedelia stuff and all the studio tricks that are on some of the middle albums from 66 and 67. And you can hear that here, and Paul really went out of his way to honor his favorite musicians. And, you've got... Rocky Raccoon, he's like doing a Dylan thing, and so that all that stuff is on here. It's okay. It's just uneven. It's better than the Magical Mystery Tour, and it's better than the ones that come before it. But that's it. I've been talking about it for 4 minutes, so I'm gonna stop. The White Album, number 7. Number 6, Meet the Beatles. I could get some hate mail over that, I guess. I don't know. This is called mostly from the UK album called With the Beatles, which has a similar album cover. This one's got like a bluish tint to it to match the meat here on the cover. I just read that today. By the way, all these albums look, they look like a record. So I think that's cool. And this is another one where, um, the stereo tracks, you can really tell it's not really stereo. It's got that duophonic thing going on. So it just sounds really echoey and reverby. It's better to listen to the mono. So if you have the endurance to skip to track 13 and listen to the mono, it's probably a little better. This is famous because it was started after the craze of the Ed Sullivan Show. They came to America in February 1964, and I Want to Hold Your Hand was a huge song. Of course, that's the first track on this album is I Want to Hold Your Hand. And this is the beginning of Beatles mania. It was crazy, girls screaming, everyone talking about their hair and all that stuff. And I do have I don't want to get too deep into my collection, but I've got the Ed Sullivan. This has got all the songs. It's an actual show from it. I don't like to go through my collection on these, but I think that one is justified. So yeah, what's on here? I Want to Hold Your Hand. I Saw Her Standing There. This Boy. It Won't Be Long. It won't be long. It won't be long. All I've Got to Do, All My Loving. All My Loving is a pretty popular song. Don't Bother Me, Little Child, Till I Was You. Hold Me Tight. Okay, I wanna be your man. I Wanna Be Your Man is that's Ringo singing, and it's kind of funny. It's kind of got a country thing going on, and Not a Second Time. Yeah, this one's I've got it ranked here at 6. I think that's right. It's better than the White Album, which has got some junk on it. And this one has just a little bit, but it's good. It's a good album. You'll like it. Meet the Beatles. Number 5, Rubber Soul from 1965. This one is like they're starting to get into, of course they were in drugs in 64, but this one it's like it's starting to become obvious on the record itself. And John is the lead songwriter here with 6 tracks. Paul has 4. George has 1. So you got a good mix of who's doing what on here. And John and Paul have one sort of like a collaborative where, most of the time John's writing a song or Paul's writing a song and they're sharing credit. This one, John wrote the song, but then Paul wrote the bridge. And I think Paul's even singing the bridge. I'd have to listen to it back, but sometimes it's hard for me to tell, because Paul can really do a lot of things with his voice. But that's one case where John and Paul actually co-wrote a song together. Okay. What else is weird about this? Oh, let's go through the songs real quick. I've Just Seen a Face. That's Paul. By the way, that's different to have Paul leading the album off with a Paul song. So that's the first track. Norwegian Wood's on here. That's a John song. Everyone likes that. You Won't See Me's on here. Think for Yourself is on here. The Word is on here. Yeah, this is a good album. Michelle is one of these soft Paul McCartney love songs. I'm sure you've heard it before. It's Only Love, Girl. Oh, Girl. Girl's the one where John's singing Girl, and then you can hear him like he sounds like he's inhaling or exhaling whatever he's smoking. Jeez. I'm Looking Through You's on here. That's a good one. In My Life. Oh. Wait. Run for Your Life. Yeah, this is in the right spot. Wait and Run for Your Life are excellent. Actually, these are all really good songs. I got this one right. This is number 5, and that's right where it should be. By the way, trivia. I mentioned at the beginning, I know that I have volume 2. It's a early print. It's a misprint. So what I had read about it was Capitol, um, when they mastered these at Sterling Sound. Sterling Sound does a lot of remasters. I mean, they do a lot of them. They remastered the whole Yes album, the whole Yes catalog. Sterling Sound, they were fooling around with the stereo, and they took the stereo mix and they folded it down into a mono, and that's what is on here. It was supposed to be the actual mono, and we know that it's the stereo fold down in a mono because on the song I'm Looking Through You, there's a false start, and there shouldn't be a false start on the mono version. But really super diehard Beatles fans know that the stereo version has the false start and the mono version doesn't have the false start. And because this one has the mono version with the false start, we know this is a misprint. So I have a misprinted copy of Volume 2, and I don't know. Is it worth me looking to get the proper? Probably not. If I ever find it, maybe I'd pick it up if I could get it cheap, but I'll probably just keep the version I have. Okay. Rubber Soul, great album, number 5, and it's deserving. It's deserving. I could get some hate mail over this one, but number 4 is Sergeant Pepper, or Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We're Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Yeah, this album's a little bit too silly for me to rank it any higher than where it is, but it just goes to show you how excellent the Beatles catalog is. That this could be a lot of bands. This could be their best record by far. A bunch of great tunes here. Now Paul's driving the band. Paul, he's not in charge, but he's definitely doing a lot. He's doing more than on the other albums. And he's stepped up his game. He started stepping up his game with Revolver and Rubber Soul, and but he's really stepped up his game here. So this album is a performance. If you don't know about the history of the Beatles, by the end of '65, they didn't like touring anymore. They had these controversies. They had the controversy with the album cover for Yesterday and Today. They had the controversy where John Lennon said the Beatles were bigger than Jesus, which is how it's interpreted. What he actually said was, the Beatles are selling more albums than they're selling Bibles. And people interpreted that as, he thinks the Beatles are bigger than Jesus. We're going to prove... if that happened now, you'd have riots and protests and, people be lighting fires in the streets and burning down banks. But, back then they were just smashing albums and calling up radio stations and yelling at the DJs. And then the DJs were boycott. Okay. Well, anyway, they decided they were going to quit touring. And another thing is they were out of tune, but they couldn't even hear themselves. Like, they knew they sounded like crap. And because the people and the girls were just screaming, they couldn't hear the music anyway. So it's like, why even go on tour anymore? Okay, so they stopped touring. They put all their efforts into making an album. And so the album becomes a performance. And this is the first one like that, which is Sgt. Pepper. All right, enough of that. Paul has 6 songs. First track, Sgt. Pepper's, Getting Better, Digging a Hole, She's Leaving Home. It could be a song about abortion. We don't know. Could be about abortion. Okay, and then the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band reprise. Okay, John has With a Little Help from My Friends, drug song. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, could be a drug song. For the Benefit of Mr. Kite, it's a little psychedelic. This is a psychedelic album. Rita, Lovely Rita Meter Maid, that's on here. and Good Morning. So he's got 5 songs. And then the best song on here is A Day in a Life, which is the last song. And that's another one where John and Paul collaborated. But not in the sense that they were sitting there jamming and writing a song. John had a song, he had a part of a song, and Paul had a part of a song, and they combined it, and it's A Day in a Life. And it might be my favorite Beatles song. Generally, when people ask me what's your favorite Beatles song, I'll say A Day in a Life. Um, yeah. George has a song on here. Um, Within You, Without You. And that's another one of his real sitar, um, Indian influenced, George is doing his thing. And it's good. It's a good song. So, number 4, Sergeant Pepper. Cool album cover, too. You could look at that picture for a long time. Another really excellent Beatles album is number 3, Abbey Road. Uh, it's a bit too serious for me to rank it any higher. Um, and it is the last Beatles album that they recorded. Now, another album was released after this, but this is the last time they went in 1969 and recorded an album. 17 tracks. It's dense. There's a lot on here. And the way they did this album is John Lennon wanted to do a regular Beatles album. Remember, at this point, they'd done the White Album, and they were trying to be more like a regular rock and roll band where they're honoring rock and roll. And they're still doing some of their India thing, but you know, they're playing classic rock, essentially. And John wanted to do that for the final album. Well, Paul was like, we still have all this content that we wrote in India, so we want to put that on a record. And they had a lot of it. And so they compromised. And what they decided was, even though George Martin's the producer, John's going to be in charge of side A and Paul's going to be in charge of side B. And so that's what they did. So in the first half, you've got a bunch of classics. Come Together, Something in the Way She Moves. Maxwell's Silver Hammer, which is really funny. it's Paul's singing about this guy running around smashing people with a hammer, killing people. and you got ding ding. It's funny. One thing that comes through in the band is how funny they are and how humorous and their sense of humor. It's really shining. Oh Darling is Paul. Octopus's Garden is Ringo. It's a song that Ringo wrote and sang. I Want You, She's So Heavy is a John song. That's his response to Oh Darling from Paul. I Want You, She's So Heavy is one of the best songs you'll ever hear. I mean, it's just so awesome. I read that it might be the first Doom track ever with its slow tempo and it's got like this real heavy, thick riff. Here Comes the Sun. Okay, Here Comes the Sun is actually side B. Okay, or side 2. So that's a George song. So that's the first 6 tracks are the more conventional. You got your 3 and 4 minute songs here. And it just shows the Beatles' growth as artists from what they were doing in 1964 and 65 all the way to the end. I mean, they were really becoming outstanding, superior rock and roll, writing these 3 and 4 minute songs. The second track, or the second half, is Paul's half, and it's more like a medley. So after Here Comes the Sun, which is a nice little conventional George Harrison song, they go into this real long extended medley. Because You Never Give Me Your Money, Sun King, Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam, She Came Into the Bathroom Window, and Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, the end. These are really quick, tricky parts of songs that they were able to stitch together into one story. Some of them are Paul's and some of them are John's. And the ones that John singing he wrote and the ones that Paul singing he wrote. It's mainly Paul, but there's the uh, like Polythene Pam is definitely John singing, and it's definitely a John song. You can just tell. But they crafted these songs so they like told a story, even though they're all independent songs. And for me, I like side two better than side one. I wish I could put it in and it would start with because um, that would make me happy. I'd much rather listen to the second side. The first side is okay. I just like the second side a lot better. That's cool to me. I mean, that's cool. Those songs are cool. You Never Gave Me Your Money and Carry That Weight. You know, when they're singing Carry That Weight, it's like you can feel the emotion of the band, and it's so powerful. It really comes across. And then the last track, the end. It's not the last track because Her Majesty's like this hidden track. You can tell it's supposed to be in the middle of the melody, but they stuck it on the end and it plays after the delay. But the end is it really is. It's them recognizing this is the grand finale of the Beatles. And they're singing about what the end's gonna be like, and then they each have a solo. So first there's this cool drum solo, and then there's a guitar solo, and it starts. I think George is first, and then Paul, and then John, if I'm not mistaken. And they're really distinct. Like the John solos are all, but it's just good. This is a good album. It might be your favorite. I think it's probably a lot of people's favorites. I've got it at number 3, Abbey Road. Number 2 is going to be a surprise to you. It's Beatles 65. I love this album. This is the other half of Beatles for Sale. For me, I could put this in any day of the week and just jam out to it. It's a John album. I guess for me, I like John better. I never knew that because I always sort of sided with Paul, but I think I'm a John Lennon guy. It has the perfect amount of emotional angst, great music, frustration. The Beatles are worn out by Beatles for Sale. They're doing a lot of drugs. You know, they're a worn out band. If you could see it's not here on this cover, but on the UK Beatles for Sale, go look at the cover. They look like they're worn out. they look like they're for sale. And this is the other half. So the other part of it was, I think something new, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I love the way it starts. No Reply. God, I love that song. I'm a Loser, unbelievable. Babies in Black. I mean, John's on a roll, and then he sings a cover of rock and roll music. So John Lennon's on fire, and then you get to the 5th song. It's I'll Follow the Song, and it's Paul singing, and it sort of slows down the momentum of the album, but then it picks right back up because Mr. Moonlight's this funny song. Honey Don't, Ringo singing this Carl Perkins. I think it's a Perkins song. It's real country. It's got a country twang, and it's got a country drum beat to it. I'll Be Back is on here. She's a Woman. And then I Feel Fine is a great classic Beatles single. Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. That's another one where I think George. I'm confused now. Is that a George or a Ringo? I think George singing. Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. Okay, Beatles 65, and of course it's a Capitol Records. This is a volume 2, and you've got the stereos and the monos on here. And I like this record. You might think I'm crazy, but everybody's different. Everybody likes something different, and of all the early Beatles albums, this is my favorite one, and it's coming in number 2 at me overall. Number 1 is Let It Be, and I'm looking at the cover. I used to have this on a t-shirt. It was like a brown colored t-shirt, and I'm wondering whatever happened to that t-shirt because I used to rock that around town. back in the day. Okay, Let It Be. Now, this album, this is my favorite album by the Beatles. It was partially ruined in production because the Beatles were a mess. They didn't know how to finish it, and they just shelved it. It was supposed to be a movie. Excuse me. It was supposed to be a movie and an album, and they couldn't agree on anything. Paul's, dating Linda, and Linda's dad is a lawyer, and Paul's starting to take advice from Linda's dad. And John, Brian Epstein's dead, so they don't really have anyone leading. And John has John's off with Yoko, and Yoko has been involved since the White Album, and they're banging heads. They're banging heads. You can see it in the movie. So if you want to go to Disney Plus, go watch Get Back, and you'll see them making this and fighting and loggerheads and not getting along great. After that, John hired Phil Spector to finish the album. Now, I don't know how he did that. Did he just... I'm John Lennon, I'm going to hire Phil Spector and have him make a Beatles album? I guess. That's what it sounded like to me. But what they did was Phil Spector put an orchestra on a lot of the songs. And you can hear strings and different brass, and he's trying to create the legendary Phil Spector wall of sound. And to me, it's not awesome, but then guess what? This came out... What year does this say? 2003. Perfect timing for me, because I had just finished that class in college, and then this album came out, and I was listening to it nonstop all the time. This is the better version. If you have these two, this is the better version. Okay. It's mainly the same songs. There's a couple nuanced differences. Oh, this one has there's something major that this one has that this one doesn't. I can't remember which one. No, the big thing is this one is not ruined by the orchestra on the long and winding road. Okay, and you can really hear it. And there's a better take of Across the Universe on this. Oh yeah, Don't Let Me Down is on this. So Don't Let Me Down was a Beatles single. It was recorded with Let It Be, but it is not on here. Don't Let Me Down. Don't Let Me Down is on here. Yeah. So that's why that's my favorite Beatles album. Let It Be Naked. The original is okay. I was listening to it the last few days. Been putting it in. I think what's cool is when they did the rooftop concert, you can hear a lot of that on here. You can hear some of that on here. But the rooftop concert is excellent. And at the end of it, you can hear Paul, you can hear him saying, well, we should go downstairs in the studio and record the acoustic stuff. Well, I guess he's talking about Across the Universe, Maggie May, For You Blue. Yeah, because they didn't play that stuff on the rooftop. So, definitely the rumors are that Paul McCartney back then was on cocaine. He needed the cocaine to drive the band. And if you ever watch Get Back, which you can on Disney Plus, you can just see Paul's energy. I mean, he's just crazy all over the place. And, he's getting... George is irritated by him, and... by that point, George and Ringo had already quit in the middle of the White Album, so, you can sense that they want to quit again. you can really feel it. Okay, this is the best Beatles album, Let It Be. That was really fun to do. I'm glad I'm able to share that with you, especially the story of the Capitol albums. You might have the original releases on CD, or if you go to Spotify or YouTube, I bet you're listening to the UK versions because Beatles have standardized that since 1988. But I like the Capitol. I like the Capitol versions. If I ever could find the UK releases, you can get them in a box set. If I could find them cheap, or maybe on a whimsy, if I ever found them, I would buy them. if someone happened to put them in my hand, but I'm not going to seek them out to get them. Let's go through the rundown real quick, and let's see if I can get this in the right order. Number 14, The Help. The Beatles' Help. Original motion picture soundtrack. 13 is Something New. 12 is Beatles 6. 11, the Beatles' second album. 10, the Early Beatles. Okay. 9, Revolver. 8, The Magical Mystery Tour. 7, The White Album. Okay. 6, Meet the Beatles. 5, Rubber Soul. 4, Sergeant Pepper. Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. All right, number 3, Abbey Road. God, that's a good record. Okay. Number 2, Beatles 65. Great. And then number 1 for me, Let It Be or Let It Be Naked. I think they're both excellent. I'd rather listen to Let It Be Naked, but to me, they're the best. All right, thanks, everybody. I'm going to try to keep doing once ranking, about once a week or twice a week. I've got some more planned. I've worked my way through Metallica and Alice in Chains, and I've worked my way through Steven Wilson, so those are coming. And I'm going to start digging into some of these albums, like one album at a time or one track at a time, so you have that to look forward to. And I appreciate all your viewership and for leaving comments or likes. So like, share with your friends, like, and subscribe, all right? Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you next time.